I published a new post last Saturday discussing some of my trades. I continue to be a net seller of stocks, and I'm still buying some stocks, and the net selling is still minor. Stock investors are not too concerned about a hot inflation report released by the BLS earlier today, or what appears to be a breakdown in negotiations with Iran. CPI rose 3.8% for the 12 months ending in April, up from a 3.3% annual increase through March and 2.5% through February. The month-to-month increase in core CPI was 0.4%, up from 0.2% from February to April, so core prices are increasing as well. Prices for many categories are being driven higher either by the Republican tariff taxes on U.S. importers or the war in Iran that has resulted in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is still closed. The price increases relating to the Iran war go beyond crude oil and liquefied natural gas and include substantial price increases in fertilizer, helium, sulfur and sulfur oxide, fertilizer, and aluminum. Major suppliers of those products are located in the Persian Gulf region, and supply from them has been effectively blocked by Iran's blockade of the strait. I'm going to summarize some of the annual increases for product categories here. Annual food up 3.2% through April. Annual apparel up 4.2%. Annual gasoline up 29.2%. Annual transportation services up 4.3%. Within that category, a subcategory is airline fares, which was up 20.7% annually. Annual medical services, 3.2%. Electricity, plus 6.1%. And that is included in the energy services category. So inflation is impacting. It can be found increasing in product categories other than energy-related products. I'm expecting annual CPI to cross 4% this summer. Table A of the BLS inflation release has the broad categories. Table 2 has the details for products in each broad category. I lack enthusiasm for stocks, which I've mentioned here many times, and concern that investors are not paying any attention at all to numerous company announcements about consumers spending less, pulling back on their spending. Lower and middle income families were already squeezed and battered by the high inflation numbers occurring in 2022, 2023. And those prices did not come down, but only moderated starting in 2024. And prices started to accelerate again now in 2026 into approaching what I would consider problematic territory where they can become embedded in inflation. And those expenditures are increased costs are occurring in categories that have to be bought, like gasoline. Retrenchment in consumer spending is likely to continue. Personal consumption expenditures have been falling in 2026 compared to the last 4 months of 2024. And consumer spending still accounts for about 70% of the economy, so the squeeze on lower and middle income families is something that has significant adverse economic effects. While GDP growth will get a major boost from AI spending in 2026 and 2027, consumers still account for 70% of the economy, and the spending on AI chips and AI infrastructure and those kind of expenditures are not flowing through into the consumer bank accounts to help them pay for things like gasoline, health insurance, clothes, airline fares, and so on. And it remains to be seen whether the companies spending these trillions of dollars, that includes Meta, Microsoft, Google, and the like, will see an adequate return on those investments in the years to come. And I do anticipate that AI will end up causing about a 10% loss in jobs over the next 10 years. That may go as high as 15%. The recent Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act, I just wanted to make a comment, says I've lived in Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana for most of my life, and so I'm familiar with the territory down here. The decision made by the 6 Republican justices on voting rights, as we have already seen, and this was known to them, has caused the southern states to take steps to effectively disenfranchise voters, black voters, in congressional elections. And those efforts at disenfranchisement of those voters has already and will continue to be more successful in disenfranchising black voters than the Jim Crow laws that existed in the South prior to the Voting Rights Act passage in 1965, I believe. Yes, the Republicans in the South are allowing black people to vote, but they might as well stay home in congressional elections since their votes have been effectively rendered meaningless by Republican-controlled state legislatures, and these are almost always middle-aged white men and some white women. Memphis, for example, which has a majority black population, I believe slightly over 50%, has just been carved up by the Republicans in Tennessee into 3 pieces, and with each piece joined with rural areas and small towns that are heavily populated by Trump supporters. And Tennessee was carried by Trump by about 64%, slightly more than 64% of the vote in 2024. Republicans had previously done the same thing, the same kind of carve-out with Nashville split in it into 3 pieces and joining each piece with heavily Trumpified areas. And this was done shortly after the 2020 census. The goal was to prevent Nashville, which would have voted for a Democrat, from ever electing a Democrat again to Congress. The Republican legislature simply decided that Nashville and now Memphis will not be allowed to vote for the representative of their choice. While the framers intended for the House to be representative of more narrow geographic regions than the Senate, that's the reason we have 432 House seats in a state, and natural groupings for people, so like in cities like Nashville and Memphis are both natural groupings of people that deserve separate representation in Congress, even though Tennessee has a Republican governor and 2 Republican senators. At least Nashville and Memphis are large enough cities, two of the major U.S. cities, but they simply are not allowed to vote for elect a Democrat anymore. And that's what they would do if they were given a choice in the matter. It cannot be emphasized enough that the 6 Republican justices, who I call monarchists, and they're not conservative at all, are actively undermining America's democracy by permitting gerrymandering. They are early in the process of creating powers and rights of a president that King George would have envied in 1776, including creating the immunity from criminal prosecution when a president commits crimes, including a crime to stay in power, contrary to the certified election results. And there was a revolution, as many people may still recall, fought against King George to prevent a president from having kingly powers. But you would think that at a minimum, a Supreme Court justice would be cognizant of the reason why there is a Constitution and a United States of America that was free from kingly authority, and why the Constitution even happened. But that is not, I don't think that's the case. They're actually undermining the reason for the American Revolution. Elections do have consequences, and this consequence will most likely last for decades now, long after I'm dead and gone. It will still be around and getting a lot worse. That will, getting the worst part of that is yet to be seen, and it will be due to the creation of what is called the unitary executive powers that people who call themselves conservatives, and they're not conservative at all, propose, and that will increase dramatically presidential power at the expense of Congress and erode the separation of powers doctrine that was the foundation of what the framers intended to do with the Constitution.